Welcome to the first video on our YouTube channel here at Hub. I'm Dee Rock. Delighted to be joined today by Ben Pedroche. Hi Ben.
Hey.
Going to chat about his new book, Independent as Fuck, Underground Hip Hop, 1995 to 2005. So welcome, mate. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. It's nice to be able to say the name of the book out loud as well, because sometimes I have to say it with a cleaned up version. So yeah, it's good. Yeah, no, great to be here.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Nottingham in the East Midlands, so not too far from here.
Yeah.
But I've been living in London since 2008. So I went down there for work. And now I'm settled there with wife, 2 kids and a mortgage, so down there for the foreseeable future now. But yeah, I mean, I know Sheffield a little bit, obviously, you know, because I say growing up not far from here, so yeah, it's nice to be back up north, as us soft southerners say.
You're more Midlands, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. You can probably tell by the accent I'm Midlands, yeah. So it's weird, because I don't think I've got an accent, but people down south say, yeah, you can tell you're from the Midlands.
Okay.
So it's not as bad as the Leicester accent or Derby accent.
No.
Yeah.
You don't sound like Capo either.
No, yeah, exactly, yeah.
So what's the first musical memories? What kind of sparked the interest in hip hop? Was it sort of a thing when you were a kid, or was it your teenage years? Or
it was. I was 11 years old, and a mate of mine lent me a Snoop Dogg CD.
Okay.
And you know, I'm a white guy from Northern England, right? So I'm not exactly target audience for hip hop, but it had swearing in it. It was cool. They were saying fuck and they were saying bitch and all this kind of stuff. So like I was captured by that.
Yeah.
And then like a lot of white kids were, to be honest, you know, like that's why it became popular on a mass scale, right? You know, hip hop. It was like, you know, suburban white kids primarily that were buying it.
Okay.
Getting a window into this world that we didn't understand. It wasn't made for us.
Yeah.
Anyway, within a few years, I went from listening to Dre and Snoop. Not that there's anything wrong with Dre and Snoop, but like, you know, I went from that to kind of
dug a little bit
deeper. And before you know it, I'm listening to, you know, hardcore indie rap from New York and LA. And yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of a kind of I'm not stuck in the 90s, because like on my blog I post new music every week, but I don't listen to a lot of like new commercial hip hop at all. I honestly tell you, I've never listened to a Drake song. I've never listened to a J. Cole song. Nothing wrong with all that stuff, and I'm sure I'm being snobby and missing out on some great music. But for me, I just kind of like that kind of the modern stuff that's kind of has that kind of ear for the 90s, and obviously the older stuff as well. So. But yeah, that's kind of my
I guess you're a little bit younger than me. I was more the sort of NWA swearing. I got into that at kind of a certain age. So you're kind of that sort of bit later, when sort of more the MTV Raps generation and those kind of things.
Yeah. So I had to go back and learn about all the 80s golden era and stuff.
Were you aware of kind of the rich history of Nottingham and hip hop and Rock City? And sort of all that scene. I mean, Nottingham's always seemed like a really hip hop city to me compared to like Sheffield and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
There's quite a legacy there of artists and DJs.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Like you say, Capo and Lee Ramsey. People like remember him. And,
of course.
In fact, for a while, I used to go and hang out at. They had like a community studio in what's it called? It's the really rough part of Nottingham.
Not Hyson Green or no?
No, the other one. St Anne's.
Yeah.
There was a community hip hop studio there that like Lee Ramsey and all those guys used to go to, and for a while I was sort of like, you know, kind of hanging out there a little bit, like a spare part. I don't think anyone really understood why I was there, but like I wanted to learn. I wanted to learn how.
So you're obviously drawn to the culture.
Exactly. You know, like by that time I was kind of like, you know, 16, 17. I was already kind of deep in the culture, but I wanted to learn how kind of production worked and that kind of stuff. So I've always been aware of the Nottingham scene for sure. Yeah.
So what age did you start sort of buying vinyl in sort of quantities rather than just like as a speculative hobby, kind of like, okay, I'm addicted to this?
Yeah. So it would have been probably when I was buying CDs right from like the start when I was.
So you were 11. CDs initially.
CDs initially, and then I would have been buying vinyl when I started college. So like 16, 17.
So we're talking sort of mid-90s here.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been buying it ever since.
So you were just at that time before the sort of internet sort of came on board and vinyl started getting phased out. So just the right time for all that kind of independent stuff coming out.
So it's at the time where you literally had to read magazines, you know. So like, you know, Hip Hop Connection or like the older magazine. I used to write for Hip Hop Connection as well. An album, you'd literally see an advert. It's coming out on this day. You go to HMV if it's like a more popular thing, buy it on that day. And then you had like Sandbox Automatic and like Hip Hop Site, a few like primitive websites. It sounds really weird to say that, doesn't it? But like those websites were really like
really
primitive,
basic,
but they were good. You know, I used to buy a shitload of records.
I think this is what
Sandbox.
I explained to kids who come to the shop kind of the work you had to put in, the research you had to put in to actually find records back in the day. It was, you know, I mean, the Source magazine was there and that, but by the time you got that, the records were 2 months old.
Exactly,
you sometimes missed the boat. So Hip Hop Connection was a very sort of essential part of, you know, reading sort of Dan Green pieces, Independence Day column, and even just looking at the adverts and seeing what's out. You know, I mean,
Hip Hop Connection was good because they did like the commercial stuff. I mean, towards the end, because when they folded, they actually went super commercial.
You had to put Mariah Carey on the cover. You know what I mean? Yeah, exactly.
And everyone ripped the piss out of them. But you know, there was a
trying to sell magazines.
It's a struggling business, and it is a business at the end of the day. But HHC was always good because they straddled that kind of commercial stuff and underground independent stuff at the same time. Just realised my jeans are ripping. Great time for my jeans to rip. Brilliant.
Don't worry about it.
Pardon that. So that was like a really pivotal magazine for sure. So.
And as far as like hearing new hip hop, I mean, people don't remember pre-internet. There was only kind of when Westwood arrived on Radio 1 that you kind of heard any kind of independent hip hop on a national radio. So I mean, obviously.
You said the W word.
There's been issues with Westwood since, which we don't do.
But
I don't think people understand how pivotal he was at kind of those 2-3 hour shows on a Friday and Saturday. You heard records that you were only ever going to hear on like a Stretch and Bobbito mixtape, or you know, he brought people like DJ Rizzo over and people like that, and that was essential on a lot of the records you talk about in the book.
Especially the Westwood show that you used to do on a Friday night.
Yeah, that was more the underground stuff, wasn't it?
I distinctly remember listening to that on a shitty radio, like in my bedroom, and as I said, that was the only way you heard it, really. We couldn't get the Stretch and Bobbito shows, and you know, so there was no YouTube.
Yeah, you relied on mixtapes and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
That was it. So when you kind of started record shopping in Nottingham, at what age did you start sort of looking outside Nottingham, going out of town to buy records and stuff? Did you come up to Sheffield? Did you go to Manchester? Did you go to Leeds?
I used to go to London a little bit. I talk about this in the book. So for Nottingham, we had Selector Disc.
Yeah.
So Selector Disc was all types of vinyl. I used to
the
go
upstairs, and there was the hip hop bit, wasn't it?
I used to go every week with my friend Sean. He's a big house fan, so he used to buy house records, and I used to buy hip hop. Every Saturday without fail, we used to go. I used to buy a couple of 12-inch records. But then my brother went to university in Luton. So we used to go on like family weekends to see him, and we used to go to London. And so I used to get to go to Mr. Bongo, which was, I mentioned this in the book, that is, Fat Beats is brilliant, but for me, Mr. Bongo was the best hip hop record shop in the world. It's just, that place is just amazing. Ironically, now it's been closed. I work about 3 seconds from it. So if it was open now.
Poland Street.
Yeah, but it's long gone now. So I used to go down for weekends in London, and I used to go to Mr. Bongo's. My parents were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you spending your money buying this weird hip-hop shit? But I used to look. So I used to get my, like, because you couldn't get all the stuff in Selector Disc. So, like, the trip to Bongos is when I used to get, like, the real kind of, like, the more kind of newer, like, Rawkus.
The stuff that never made it north.
Yeah, exactly.
Pressed in, like, quantities of 100 or whatever. Yeah.
But Selector Disc was pretty good, though.
Yeah, no, it was a good shop.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking of Bongos.
Lost your train of thought.
Yeah, you put me up on Bongos. I used to. You mentioned the book. You sometimes felt intimidated going there because it would, be full of men, a bit old and whatever. And how long before that kind of faded away?
I mean, kind of like, I think the thing about indie hip hop, and obviously any like subgenre of music, is that you feel like you're in like a special little club that only you know about. So I think it probably took me a few years and a few trips to meet Mr. Bongos to feel like I was part of that club. Yeah. So it was only there in those sort of like early trips that I felt like a little bit intimidated. But it wasn't an intimidating shop to walk into. It was smaller than this, and this is pretty small, right? It was smaller than this.
It was really narrow, wasn't it, Bongos?
And it was like kind of quite dark, and like literally graph all over the walls and stuff. It's the quintessential hip hop vinyl shop. But it was quite intimidating, and you feel like I was literally afraid to ask what songs they were playing. Which, like, I'm kicking myself now because I know it would have been some stuff that I missed out on buying, But I used to come out with about 4 or 5 12-inches, like £6.50 a pop, which now sounds cheap as anything, doesn't it? But
Yeah. See, I was a bit older than you, so I used to ring them up every day. The adverts would come out in Hip Hop Connection and see what I'd be on the phone on my mum's phone. Can you remember the phone number?
Yeah. No,
01718 877 something like. My mum used to come in with a bill and be like, "What the fuck's this? Why are you on the phone to this number all the time?"
Tell you what,
but I used to ring him up and he used to calm me, be like, "This dickhead's on the phone again." And he's asking about Money Boss players and can he send a postal order and stuff like that.
It's
and
so funny.
I used to do it all the time. Man.
I should have mentioned this in the book. I randomly remembered this the other day. So Mr. Bongo, I think before I ever went down there, I sent them a letter. This is how old I feel now, right? It was a letter, physical letter, saying, I really like collecting like hype stickers and flyers and stuff. Can you send me some? And they sent me like this envelope full of them, and I've still got more somewhere.
They were really nice guys.
Awesome, awesome
he was an awesome guy. They were all really lovely stuff.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. I'm sure they weren't intimidating.
No, they were just geeks like us.
Yeah, they felt like they were because, like I say, at that point, I still felt like a bit of an outsider. But no, they were good guys. Yeah,
lovely. Yeah. So when you discovered bongos, did you go further into Soho? Did you go to Deal Real?
Deal Real, yeah.
Black Market, Major Flavors, all those.
Some of them, yeah, definitely Deal Real for sure, which is again gone now. So I met Skinny Man for the first time in Deal Real actually. Years ago.
That was a good shop.
It's so funny actually. Like I walked in and I was like, he was like, "Can I help you?" Like he worked there. He didn't work there. He was like, I was like, "You're Skinny Man." I was like, "Yeah." He was such a nice guy. Such a nice.
A fellow Yorkshireman. From Leeds.
Exactly. Yeah. He's like,
dated Mel B when he was a teenager.
Really?
You know that one? Yeah.
Wow.
Exactly. Yeah.
Who hasn't? But So Deal Real, and then not many others to be honest. I think it was only kind of like later that I realised there was other ones.
So were you buying records with the idea of DJing? Did you have turntables and stuff, or were you purely just you love the music, you want to collect it and stuff?
I did have turntables, but I've always been too shit to try and be DJ. I haven't got patience.
So you never played out or anything?
No, never played. Just always at home. I had a crappy little mixer, Gemini mixer. My dad got me a SL1200 like for 90 quid second hand. It's worth like about $1,000 now, right? But like it still works perfectly. And I had 2 odd decks. I had a Gemini deck and 1 Technics, but no, always just to play music. Yes. I fancied myself that I could scratch, but at a very basic level.
So that brings a different approach to record shopping when you're buying just to listen to at home rather than sort of DJing and stuff. I guess you can be a bit more self-indulgent.
Exactly, and shout out to my parents as well because they never cared that I was playing hip hop really loud in the house at home. Like, they never complained once, so that was good.
Yeah. So at this point, how were you sort of getting information? Is the internet kicking in by now? Were you kind of sort of late 90s? Yeah, 95,
but like
96.
I said, it was mainly magazines still.
So did you ever make it over to sort of New York, anywhere like in those days? Or
I did. I went to Fat Beats. I've been to New York about 7 or 8 times. I went to Fat Beats one time before it shut. It must have been 2001, 2002, maybe. So around about that time. So a couple of years before it closed. I only got to go to the one upstairs. I never got to go to the original. Did you ever go to the original?
No, I didn't. No, just the late one. But Percy P was always outside on a mountain bike trying to sell mixtapes.
You know what? As well, again, like looking back, probably that when I went was probably the era when like Breezy Brewing, Ill Bill, Q Unit all worked behind the counter. And I probably was served by one of those and didn't even know at the time. So, but I got to go to Fat Beats one time. And a few other shops in New York. So
So just for people who are watching online. Just explain what an independent hip hop label is in your eyes, as opposed to someone who's maybe distributed by a major record company.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, first of all, it's important to say that independent music is not just hip hop, right? It's every genre of music. Also books, films. We all know like the indie films, like Tarantino and stuff. But essentially, in music, from a business side, independent. Then, I mean, it's kind of. Everyone's a record label now, right? So it's a little bit different now, but in the period that I cover, independent record label meant it was a record label that wasn't attached in any way at all to one of the big record labels, right? So they didn't have that distribution network, that promotion budget. It was like literally kind of you either release records yourself completely independently, and by that I mean, you record it in a studio or back. This is way before everyone had a studio on their laptop, right? This is, you had to go and hire studio time, which you always hear rappers talk about how expensive that was and how they had to do it really quickly. So you do all that yourself, you pay for that yourself, you pay for the records we pressed up yourself, and then you distribute them hand by hand in Fat Beats or whatever. That's like one way. Or you sign to an independent label, which is obviously a label, but again, that is separated from record, the big majors, you know. So again, it's all kind of DIY basically, and you're taking on all that risk and expense yourself. So that's from the business side. And then in terms of hip hop, obviously we all know that indie underground hip hop from that period had its own aesthetic as well, like a style, like you can instantly tell when something was like an underground hip hop record. So that's the kind of sort of post boom bap thick heavy beats and
not just looping old R&B records and stuff like that.
Gritty, dusty samples, and, well, at least in New York anyway. And then so it's a kind of an aesthetic and like a business meaning, and I kind of try to like make that distinction in the book. as well, I kind of make a point of mentioning how I'm using independent and underground to mean the same thing. I mean, they're kind of slightly different, but they're kind of quite interchangeable. So, yeah. But that's how I define it anyway.
So when do you think that era really kicked off then, sort of in terms of the sound? Do you think it was, I mean, in my eyes, it was probably like after Illmatic, Nas's album, and Wu-Tang dropped, that major labels were putting out that gritty kind of hip-hop, and I think a lot of the labels tried to make their artists into those kind of, you know, doing that kind of sound. Like the second UMC's album was like really like MC Lights coming out with like Roughneck and stuff, and I think they kind of missed the point of it really. And I think, do you think that's where the kind of small labels came in and kind of sort of they became sort of, I mean, American radio is all payola, so you're not getting on the radio unless you're signed to a major, so you needed shows like Stretch Your Mobito to bring all these artists through and stuff. And what songs in your sort of mind sort of define that sort of 94, 95 period that really kicked that off?
I mean, it's kind of...
Because the West Coast sound was pretty dominant then, wasn't it? And then there was Biggie and stuff. It was kind of post Wu-Tang, wasn't it?
It was, And I mean, but the interesting thing is that two of the people that kicked off that whole kind of, in New York at least, indie era from like 94, 95 onwards, were two people from the golden era, right? So you've got Kool Keith and Doom, right? So Kool Keith, you know, Ultramagnetic MCs, by the time like 94, they're pretty much like, you know, almost faded. So Kool Keith starts recording with Godfather Don, and then they start making this sort of like weird underground
the Cenobites album.
Cenobites, and that's
on the wall if you want to buy it.
And that's when Kool Keith decided to like be himself, and all these weird characters and stuff. And then you've got Doom. So MF Doom is in.
That's the record for me. The Cenobites, that really kicked it off, I think.
So you've got KMD Doom. For those who don't know, that was the group where it was MF Doom before he was MF Doom and his brother, and then his brother dies, and they get dropped from the label, and Doom disappears into obscurity and living homeless, and then comes back and then takes over the whole of the underground hip-hop scene basically. So it's ironic that the two people that kicked that off, well, two of the people that kicked it off were from that old kind of like older generation. So that they were two pivotal points. And then like, you know, Mos Def and Talib Kweli and the whole raucous thing. On the West Coast it was kind of Hieroglyphics obviously, and Project Blowed and Freestyle Fellowship, the whole Good Life Cafe, that was like a big breeding ground for it on the West Coast. So you had all these things come together, and then it was kind of just went from there really. So.
I mean, three of those sort of groups you mentioned, like Hieroglyphics, Del, Kool Keith, they all got kind of chewed up and spat out by the major labels.
Absolutely,
didn't
they'd all had that thing, and like I said, Doom as well, right? And so that is really the spark of that whole independent as fuck thing, right? Because it very quickly became a badge of honor where like, we are independent. If you don't give us a chance to do it, well, fuck you, basically, we'll do it ourselves. And that became like a rallying call, and that became like the mantra. And like you say, all the people from Hieroglyphics, Dell, Casual, the rest of them, they'd all been shitted on, basically.
Can we blame Puff Daddy for this? A lot of other stuff?
I blame Puff Daddy for a lot of stuff in that book, and I'm very blatant about it, and it's great timing because he's on trial right now for being a dickhead. But
allegedly.
But no, you can blame Puff Daddy. So you really can, because basically, obviously it wasn't just Puff Daddy, and obviously Puff Daddy was involved in a lot of good music, like obviously Biggie, all that.
He knew how to make a hit,
You know how to make a hit, but you can't blame Puffy, because like that whole shiny suit era that everyone talks about, he and Hype Williams with the videos, you blame them as well.
But even Busta Rhymes, who was kind of like an underground, Leaders New School weren't a commercial group. He went down that path and stuff, but still kind of maintained a level of respect.
Yeah, well, like you say, like Jay-Z, Biggie, Busta Rhymes, they managed to keep that respect because they made, Jay-Z's working with DJ Premier, a lot in them days. But no, you can blame Puff for like, it's the kind of, like I say, I don't want to shit completely on commercial hip hop because that's not what I'm trying to do. But like, it's that Puff Daddy shiny suit era where it became very shallow. There was nothing of depth. The samples were blatant samples, It wasn't just like take a snippet, flip it, do something creative with it. Let's take a whole Lisa Stansfield, whatever it was, Diana Ross. It was so blatant, and it became something else. And it's got a place.
Again, it was aimed at radio, wasn't it?
So, you can blame everything for Puffy, basically. We just blame him for everything.
So you mentioned Raucous there, which I don't know if people know the history of Raucous Records. It was funded by the Murdochs, which is quite, ironic. And they threw a ton of money at it, didn't they?
Yeah, so Raucous is a very interesting one because, I mean, I've got a lot of underground hip-hop in my vinyl collection. Raucous is by far the record label that I've got most of. Because they put out some absolutely incredible records. Everything from kind of, Company Flow on one side to Mos Def and Quali on the other side. And yes, after a few years, it came out that they were not independent at all. No. They were two rich kids who happened to be pally with Rupert Murdoch's son. And he was bankrolling it, basically.
Yeah, they had their own offices in London at the time.
They had swanky Manhattan offices.
They had one in London.
Yeah,
my
exactly.
mate worked there.
So, but you can't really be mad at them, to be honest, because on the one hand, yes, it was exploitative, right? They were coming in, they were like, hey, let's start a hip hop record label. We're cool guys, even though they were a bunch of dorks, really, let's face it. But so they were kind of exploiting it, but at the same time, they boosted that whole thing massively. Like they put out some amazing records, but in response to what you said earlier on, they wanted to be Puff Daddy, basically. So they kind of ruined it because they started buying like gold chains for their artists, and they started throwing like $1 million at a Cool G Rap album, and they signed no one ever heard, basically.
They signed a lot of artists like Big L and Cool G Rap and stuff, but never really knew what to do.
Exactly.
With them,
so at first they were a genuinely indie record label in terms of the aesthetics, never the business side. But then they kind of wanted to become a big flashy label, and that's when it kind of all fell apart.
It's funny. I really enjoyed the first few releases, the Mos Def and the Black Thunder, and I think by the time they got to that Lyricist Lounge stage and the sound bombing stuff, I think the kind of production of hip hop had changed by then. Due to the sampling laws, I think as well. A lot of that sort of gritty, sort of mid-90s sound, it changed to a bit more of a kind of less sample-based kind of drum machine sound. And I think that was the kind of era for me where it started going a bit kind of like that, the sort of New York sound anyway. I don't know what you thought.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, I mean, you still had the kind of the gritty labels like Hydra and Fondle and stuff, but then, by the end of the...
probably at the end of the 90s, really.
Yeah, the end of the century, end of the millennium, sounds weird, doesn't it now? Then, into the 2000s, that's when you kind of... There's another wave where it kind of distances itself from that again, and then you get Def Jux, LP goes into this weird sort of dystopian sci-fi
left field,
which to be honest at the time was too weird for me. It was only in recent years I've gone back and really appreciated the Def Jux stuff, Cannibal Ox and LP's own stuff a lot more now, whereas I was a little bit turned off by it at the time. It was a little bit too kind of sci-fi for me, but then it was into a whole new wave of that. And then on the West Coast you've got Black Alicious and Quantum and all that kind of stuff, again taking it into a new direction. So
I know by that time for me personally, the internet had become a big thing. Things like SoulSeek and Napster and stuff like that, and I think that kind of did for a lot of those kind of independent labels. But for me, that opened up a lot of the sort of regional hip hop, which you do mention in the book, the Memphis stuff, stuff out of Atlanta, Texas, and stuff. Which I was into a lot of it, but only the stuff from major labels because you couldn't get it over here unless you kind of specifically went looking for some import CDs and HMV and something. So did you delve into that world at all? Or?
A little bit. It was kind of I did that later. I someone like Little Brother, one of my favorite groups. But I hand on my heart, I discovered them a few years after. You know what I mean? Because that was all the kind of OK Player forums and stuff. I was never really into that. So I kind of went back and discovered a lot of that. But no, like you say, the regional underground hip hop was coinciding with regional hip hop on a commercial scale. The whole Dirty South, Atlanta type stuff. That was all happening on a commercial level, but it helped stimulate it on an underground level as well. So now you've got underground artists from Atlanta, you've got underground artists from Ohio, from Minnesota. Atmosphere and that kind of stuff, and then obviously Detroit with Dilla and all that kind of stuff. So in that first 5 years of the 2000s, it was definitely a lot about the regional hip hop, underground hip hop for sure.
I think that kind of gave it another rebirth, didn't it? When Dilla kind of, Dilla had been around since the mid-90s and stuff, doing stuff with Tribe and big artists. But I think when he started doing stuff with Stone's Throw and Madlib and stuff, it kind of gave it another kick again, didn't it? Sort of 2000
as well, like you say.
Exactly.
Dilla goes back, like you say, longer than I think people think. Slum Village, it was 93, when they were first making music. But it kind of took the post Common and post Tribe Called Quest and that kind of era for him to be picked up on a more of a kind of mass scale. So
So just talking about sort of albums from that era. What are some of your favourites from?
So many to choose from. I mean, you have to say the obvious ones, right? So Operation Doomsday, for what that did, that was the introduction.
See, people think that was a massive album at the time. It wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
It was a real slow burn. I mean,
exactly.
I got it quite early, and we used to play like Rhymes Like Dimes and stuff in a club, and it wasn't a club record.
No.
And people would come up like, "What the fuck is this?
Yeah.
This is weird." And it took maybe a couple of years for it to really sort of kick off.
Yeah.
And I think that gets misconstrued at times.
Yeah, no, it's true. Yeah. So there's that, and then the Dr. Octagon album, and then Fun Crusher Plus, the Company Flow album. For me, that was like life-changing album for me. I think that is like the perfect underground hip-hop album, to be honest. I mean, I'm such a big like LP stan for what he's done, for the underground hip-hop culture. That, and then, the Mos Def album, and the Black Star album on the Raucous side, and the Pharoah Monch album, and then Mad Villainy, obviously, all of Black Alicious albums, all of Jurassic 5 albums, all the Hyro stuff. It's just so many. There's just so many good albums from that period. You kind of think of it as like a 12-inch era. Yeah. But there was really.
See, I was more buying 12 inches.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I didn't buy a lot of albums.
Stupidly, because they all go for silly money
now.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, but no, I'm like you. I see it more as like a 12-inch thing. Yeah. So yeah.
Why did you decide to focus just on the US scene and not UK independent hip hop in the book?
So two reasons. I actually did want to at first.
Yeah.
Obviously coming from the UK as well, I know a lot about UK hip hop. But two reasons why I didn't. First of all, it was getting too big, so I had to rein it a little bit because, if we start talking about UK, you've got to do France and Germany and Japan and Denmark and stuff. Where there's great scenes, but it was becoming too big, and I had to rein it a little bit because it would have I would have spread myself a little bit too thin. But there's another reason as well, is that, so like I said earlier on, there was a big sort of us versus them, indie versus mainstream. And that's kind of like the crux of the book. That's why, the independent as fuck was a good thing. So in the UK and other regional scenes, everything was independent, right? So I didn't have that.
Pretty much,
I couldn't really compare indie UK to like more commercial UK rap because until the last, decade of like grime and stuff, there hasn't been any mainstream UK hip hop, apart from the odd outlier. So I couldn't make that distinction. And the same in, all the other places in Europe and stuff. So that's why I dropped it. But yeah, it was mainly to kind of rein it in a little bit. So it's North America and Canada. But to be honest, that is North America. The US and Canada. But to be honest as well, that's my wheelhouse. That's the stuff that interests me. I love UK hip hop, but my passion has always been the North American stuff. So so it's kind of, keep it what you know, really. So yeah.
Fantastic.
It would have been great though to include all that other stuff.
Yeah.
And that's also
maybe another book.
Well, exactly.
Well, the Mega Blast book we've got in stock,
that's
by the way.
Book, isn't
that's
it?
a really good one.
Yeah.
On, more 80s and.
It's a great book. But that again, that was another reason why I wanted to keep it that 10-year period so it didn't get too big. I do talk about before, I do talk about after, but it's that. But again, that 10-year period was the real kind of sweet spot.
Yeah. So do you think 2005, where you've kind of cut, do you think that's where it started to fall off? Especially because record shops were closing.
Yeah, I mean,
MP3s are basically taken over. Everyone's got a phone and whatever, or MP3.
Exactly. Yeah, you're getting towards the streaming era. At least the early streaming era, the illegal download area, the iTunes era, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say it fell off, but it petered off. What I mean is the quality didn't necessarily go down, but the kind of big, sort of like tentpole releases and that kind of, I don't know, it kind of lost its sort of like authenticity a little bit after that because, like you say, it was less about going to a record shop and buying 12 inches. It was, going on LimeWire and finding some obscure remix of a Slum Village song or whatever, So
can we blame Kanye West for that? I think we can, can't we?
Again, you can blame him for most things in life. Yeah, isn't it crazy though to think that like
they've all turned out to be massive wrong-uns?
But like that Kanye West is the same Kanye West.
Who absolutely introduced himself as this independent hip hop artist.
My wife always teases me. She's always saying to me, "Remember years ago when you liked Kanye West?" I'm like, "Yeah, I did," because he wasn't the same person then.
You weren't on your own. There's a few others.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, you can blame Kanye for that, for sure.
So you mentioned Bongos. Is that the best record shop you've ever been to?
Yeah, it was because I say the one time I went to Fat Beats, it was awesome. I'd always wanted to go to Fat Beats, but just something about the vibe of that shop. It was just the perfect record shop for me,
Do you know? Funnily enough, the only time I went to Fat Beats, I arrived in New York for the first time I'd ever been. It was New Year's Day 2005, funnily enough. And I can remember being in Fat Beats and the guy behind the counter was like, he's playing me all these new Stones Throw releases or whatever. I ended up buying Cameron Purple Haze, much to his fucking annoyance.
Yeah.
No, because every car and cafe you went in New York at the time, the album was just fucking banging, every sneaker shop. Right. I was like, I want that, and you should have seen his face, it just dropped like that.
They did sell some commercial stuff though, didn't they? A little bit.
Oh,
they had like a little corner, like.
Yeah. But yeah, that's my only memory of Fat Beats. So.
Yeah, as I say, I only got to go that one time, but yeah, it was brilliant.
Have you ever made it out to Japan record shopping?
No.
No.
I've never been to Japan at all. So
okay, yeah, that's a good one.
It's worth doing.
Yeah, the exchange rate's pretty favourable at the minute, so a good time to go. But if you're looking for records you can't find, that's a good place to go.
They had a lot of like issues that were just for Japan as well, didn't they? Like
they bootleg everything as well.
So. Yeah, but even some official things, right? A lot of it, like Dilla stuff and things like that. Yeah.
So do you think it'll ever come back?
What, vinyl?
Independent hip-hop? I mean, it kind of has in a fashion with this Griselda movement and all this kind of thing, but we were chatting earlier, it's become more of a collecting thing now, more than a DJ's vinyl thing, hasn't it?
I think aesthetically, there are, as I say, there's good indie hip-hop coming out every week. You know, I post it all, the stuff that I like on my website. So it's never kind of gone somewhere in that sense, but it's never going to come back in the sense of like, there's never going to be 12 inches, new 12 inches coming out, right? It's all like say albums. So it's kind of, I doubt if it's ever going to come back in terms of
the single thing's gone, isn't it?
Yeah, the single thing's gone. I do think CD is going to come back big time at some point. Honestly, look at vinyl, right? Who would have thought vinyl like 15 years ago? Like you said, it's going to make a comeback and you can buy it in Urban Outfitters or, where was I the other day? I was in like WH Smith for selling vinyl. It's crazy.
Give it over.
Yeah. Absolutely, but yeah, I don't think it's ever going to come back in that sense of like proper like dusty finger digging through.
It's funny, kids come in here and they see a 12-inch and it's 80 quid and they go, has this only got 2 songs? And he's trying to explain to them the concept of a 12-inch. You just assume they know what a 12-inch single is, but a lot of them don't.
Do you think like it's crazy that we're calling them kids? But these kids, do you think that they? We were talking earlier on, do you think they're buying stuff from you to listen to or just to keep on a shelf somewhere?
I think it's a bit of a mix. I think some of the kids who buy the new albums, a lot of them actually say, but I haven't got a record player, I'm saving up for one. So, they're obviously just sticking it on a wall or doing whatever and then listen to it online, which I find very odd. But it's you trying to explain to them what it was like trying to go out of town. I used to, as soon as I passed my driving test when I was 17, that was it. Me and my friend, Mr. Rugged over there. We used to go to Leeds once a month, Nottingham once a month, Manchester once a month, Notts once a month, just on the chase, and it was about networking and about getting to know people. And I think that's been lost with teenagers nowadays. I've got a 13-year-old and all he does is sit at home on his PlayStation and talk to his mates that way. He's not part of something. And I think, with youth clubs closing and just lack of things to do for young people now, it's a different mentality. Whereas when I was a teenager, you felt like, this is something I can get involved in. I can, whether it be DJing or music production or just being into the music and part of a scene. I think it was a lot more tribal when we were younger. There's your indie kids, your football kids, your hip hop kids, and I think that's kind of skipped maybe a generation. And maybe it's coming back. I don't know, but it's interesting.
I think a big thing of it as well is like being able to touch stuff, right? Because like everything's digital, right? And there's nothing like touching vinyl. There's nothing like reading a book, right? I'll read books on a Kindle, but I'll buy physical books as well. So I think there's been a bit of a kind of rebellion against everything being digital. You don't really own anything. Nothing's real. So I think people like that tangible feeling of touching a record or a book, whatever. So,
100%. I've definitely noticed that in the shop. You can tell kids are just bored of doing that. And they can actually come in a shop and spend an hour, and that's what we've called it Hub, because I want people to come and hang out here. And when maybe I'm being nostalgia's can be overrated at times, and it is good to look forward to stuff, but I think this stuff does need documenting so kids understand what the process was, what it was like to go out record shopping, and what that sort of feels like, the enjoyment and the relaxation of it, and it's fun. Do you know what I mean? It's
for sure. One thing about kids, I'm only 44, but anyway. Kids buying albums, especially old ones, and not so much hip hop, but I see it all the time. I go, even though I don't really buy much because it's expensive, but I go to the record shops in Soho pretty much every day, and I see like teenagers buying like David Bowie albums, whatever, and that's good because it's kind of bringing back the sense of what an album is. Because let's face it, an album doesn't really mean anything anymore, right? Spotify. If someone released something on Spotify as an album, to most young people, it's just a bunch of tracks. So if they're buying like an old Bowie record or whatever, and if they have got a record player, if they go home and listen to it, they listen to it as an album. And I think it's kind of good because, you know, people can actually experience an album. Because people still make albums, right? You know, you see like, you know, my album's out next week, and you kind of feel sorry for artists now because like hardly anyone's going to listen to it as an album.
Yeah, who's going to sit there for an hour?
Exactly.
And,
so if these...
And we're guilty of that.
Yeah, well,
Exactly.
I'll just pick a few, you know, Bandcamp or whatever. But if it means that people appreciate albums again, then yeah, I'm all for it. So yeah. But it is weird as anything to think that people are buying vinyl again, right? It's crazy.
It is.
It'll be good for you. Good for
well, I hope so. Need to carry on.
Yeah, I was going to say something else. I can't remember what it was now.
Don't worry about it. So do you still get out digging much?
A little bit. I mean, I'm a bit of a Discogs guy now, but Discogs is a weird place. Like I was saying to someone earlier on, it's either it's kind of way too expensive, or you find a good price record, but then you realise it's from like Outer Mongolia, and it's like 5 times the cost.
Well, there's a lot of what I've noticed now is there's a lot of shell companies, and they pose like they're in the UK, but they're actually based in China, and the order takes 3 weeks to come because they get a pallet load of stuff and ship it all at once. There's a lot of that third party nonsense going on.
But no, I do a little bit. Like I say, I work really close to all the ones in Soho, and they only have like a small hip hop section. But you know, I do sometimes get some good stuff. So yeah,
keep on digging.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say in terms of how I came to write the book. So as I said, I've been writing about hip hop for many years. So I used to write for Hip Hop Connection back in the day, and Undercover magazine, and a lot of the other like UK. Did actually have something in Source once, I think, years ago. Anyway, and yeah, so I've actually written a few other books about like London history. It's completely separate to hip hop, but that's something else I've always been interested in. But I never really thought of a good hook to write a hip hop book on. And then I just thought, you know what, this is like the era that I love, so that's why I decided to do this one. I'm just so glad that I've actually finally written a hip hop book. And it actually feels like a book as well. Like the other ones I wrote about London are more sort of like history reference books. So like they're sort of quite.
Well, there's a good mix in your book, I think, for people who haven't read it, about your personal story and stuff, and then sort of not a database, but more sort of like
it's like a reference.
These are like a reference.
I kind of wanted to do something where people can like dip in. Like the only thing written from my first person is the intro. Everything else is not written from my perspective because like. You know, who cares what I've got to say really, but I mean it's because I wanted it to be like a book that you can read from front to back, then you can also dip into as well. To be honest, I'm doing it myself sometimes. I'll like, you know, what was that? I'm literally going to my book to do my research now, but yeah, it's like a reference book. So
how long did that process take you to get
write
together?
it?
A couple of years? Or?
No, about 11, 12 months.
Okay,
yeah, like a year. Yeah, because I was given sort of like quite an ambitious. I gave myself a deadline with a publisher because if I didn't give myself a deadline, I never would have got it done. I'm a big procrastinator, so with a full-time job, 2 young kids, it was hard work, but do it in the evenings and stuff. So.
I've been trying to get a book together about hip-hop dancers for years, because no one's ever done one.
Hip-hop dancers?
The dancers for all the groups, you know, like you have Scoob and Scrap with Kane, or the Big Steps in Master Race, and all different dancers, because no one's ever written about it. But it's never going to happen, because it's like got time. It's probably like, it took me about 10 years to get together, but if someone's out there who wants to put that together, I'll buy it.
I'd buy it for sure. But yeah, like it was like you say, no one's ever kind of done this before either. You know, it's like it's important to document it.
I'm amazed no one in the States has done it.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few things that have riffed on it, but to me, hip hop is a genre that, let's face it, is not respected like at all. You know, it's always a bit of a joke for people outside of hip hop. It's always like, you know, the butt of the jokes. People take the piss out of it. People parody it. So it's not taken seriously. It's not respected on a mainstream scale. And
what do you mean by the mainstream media, or? I
mean, like, kind of like from sort of, like, people write theses on rock and roll, right?
Right.
People write serious coffee table books on, you know, but you don't really see it on hip hop, and I think it's seen outside of the hip hop sphere. I think it's still seen as this sort of like weird little thing over there.
Which is strange for the biggest selling music in the world.
Yeah, but people say that, but let's face it, that's Drake, right? That's like, you know, it's not the kind of stuff that I write about. But for me, the best hip hop journalism is the journalism that writes it in a way that's respectful and really pushes the fact that it deserves to be seen academically and kind of like intellectually on the same level as any classic genre of music. It's been going 50 odd years. It's here to stay. So in the book, that was one of my biggest goals, to write about it in a way that's actually legitimizes it, is what I'm trying to say. And like, you know, look, this is a proper thing. Let's talk about it and give it the respect it deserves, just the same way you give other genres of music the respect.
It's interesting because there's like magazines like Ego Trip and Fat Lace took it even further with the piss taking angle. Yeah, exactly. But those guys knew their stuff, so it's kind of like
love, right?
exactly.
Yeah. But you know, hip hop is always the parody. It's the thing that gets parodied. You know, right from like, you know, Morris Minors, whatever. You know, remember that thing? Or like, you know, all the way to like, you know,
the Anfield rap,
the average Saturday Night Live sketch. You know, like, it's always been sort of like, you know, kind of lampooned, if you like. So. You know, so I want to kind of legitimise it and write about it in a way that's respectful. You know?
Have you read the Dilla book by Dan Charnas?
Yeah, it's great.
So that's probably, like you talk about, tackling in this series, where the way he kind of talks about the production and how it goes back to sort of times and Africa. And, that's most incredible.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. To
talk about it in a serious way.
I'm not saying you have to do it in an academic way, because you don't want to get pretentious, because, you know,
it's quite heavy going, that book at times.
You know, hip hop is a fun genre of music, right? But like, you can write about it in a way that's respectful. You know, so. Yeah, and that's what I've tried to do. So
100%.
Yeah.
Well, appreciate you spending time with us. It's been a really interesting chat, and good luck with the book. Where can people buy it?
People can buy it from here right now.
Yeah, you can.
Or you can buy it direct from the publisher or Amazon, wherever you get books from. So,
where you can get books. Yeah. Fantastic.
It is in some physical shops as well, probably mainly in London, but anywhere bookshop you go, they can order it for you. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, appreciate your time. Good luck with the book. Thanks to everyone who's come in and sat with us on the chat. Thank you to Jason for the technical help, and get digging. Buy some more records. Peace out.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, dude.
Thank you.
Cheers, lads. Thanks. I don't know if you learnt anything, but.